Hey, what's up guys, this is Liam or Weagle, and today we're going to be taking a look at a lot of D4 information that was just released over on their live stream. This of course was hosted by Riker and had Joe Shelley, Joseph Pipora and Adam Fletcher on too. There's a bunch of info in here and I'm sure some people will point out that not all of it is new, so I want to go through and take a look at the stuff that was new, was interesting, and also the things that were confirmed via leaks as well. There's a lot of new information in here guys, so let's take a look at it. The first thing I want to go over is actually changes to the classes that we all play, because not all of these were released last week when they spoke about them. So first up, there are some general changes to the classes. Effects like stuns and freezes can be applied to elite monsters twice as long before they become unstoppable now. They've also reviewed class skills to confirm that all classes have access to sufficient skills that remove control impairing effects, and many legendary powers have had updates to their effectiveness. They did also add in this interview that there are a lot of minor changes that are not on this list, whether it be to like hydras for the sorcerer, that's not on this list, but there are tweaks, and there are also further tweaks to gear that you get and very minor things in the skill tree as well. Next up, we've got the barbarian. A flat 10% damage reduction has been added for the barbarian class, and some skill tree passives have had their damage reduction effects reduced to compensate. Whirlwind now deals more damage but consumes more fury, and the double swing skill enchantment refunds its full fury cost when used on stunned or knocked down enemies. This is basically in response to barbarians having a rough time on enemies that wanted to move away from you. As you're the class that's going to spend the most time in the face of an enemy and taking damage, they wanted to add a damage reduction by default for the class. They have also stated that there will be some slight tweaks in AI as well, so that you're not just constantly standing in pools as the barbarian and you're going to be able to get off sufficient damage. Next up is Druid. The companion skills now deal heavily increased damage. All ultimate skills have had their cooldowns reduced. Usability improvements have been made to maul and pulverize, and using a non-shape shifting skill will transform a Druid back into their human form. Also, by the way, they did confirm on this stream that there are uniques in the game that will allow you to permanently be a werewolf or a werebear, and Riker even said that he got to play a storm werewolf where he was always in the werewolf form, but he was also a lightning mage at the same time, which really does sound pretty cool. Next up is Necromancer. Summoned minions will die more often now, requiring players to utilize corpses more often. They have stated that there will be enough corpses for you to keep summoning minions, but they really want it to be an active part of the gameplay and not just a passive thing that follows you around and does things for you for free. They really want you to have to think about this, and I think that's a pretty cool change. Also, many bonuses in the Book of the Dead have had their stats increased. Damage dealt by the corpse explosion has been reduced. I mean, I think we all saw that one coming. And also the brightness of the skeletal warriors and mages has been reduced. I know a lot of people didn't like this, especially when you was walking around town, and they have also confirmed that your minions will no longer be following you around in town either. Rogue probably had the least changes. Upgrades for subterfuge skills have had their bonuses increased. Multiple passive skills have had their bonuses increased, and all imbuement skills have had their cooldowns increased. So this is to nerf that explosion imbuement, I'm sure, in a slight way, but also add a few passive increases to keep the rogue still a very viable class. And finally, a lot of changes for sorcerer. Charged bolts damage was increased, and the mana cost to cast has decreased. They have decreased the damage of chain lightning and reduced its effectiveness against bosses. They have decreased the cooldown for the incinerate skills enchantment bonus. Firewalls will now spawn underneath enemies more frequently when using its enchantment bonus, and they have increased the lucky hit chance for meteors skill enchantment bonus. As I say, they have confirmed that these are not the only changes, and that there are a lot of minor changes that are also going to add up in the skill tree and in gear itself. So overall, in isolation, none of these are a huge change in one go, but with all of these things happening at the same time, it'll be interesting what happens when we play the new beta, which has been confirmed for May 12th, which is also the final version of the game, and they've said it's not going to change a lot. So these changes that you see here in conjunction with the few behind the scenes is the game that we're going to play at launch. Next up, they went in depth on the Paragon Board system and clarified a lot of things that people were concerned about. So the main concern with these is that when they showed them before, it seemed like a lot of the pathway through the board was just normal stat nodes. Well, they've actually clarified today that there are 4 types of nodes. There's normal nodes, which are the stat nodes that you will be using to get from A to B. There are magic nodes, which are going to affect abilities and certain things. One that they shown was that crackling energy damage was increased by 8.5%. There are rare nodes, which are more powerful effects. The one that they showed was 32% increase in damage to elites and a 14% speed boost after killing elites. And some of these will get a bonus if another stat is high enough. For example, with this one, 260 dex was the requirement to get another 16% damage to elites if you have the right amount of dex. And another rumor circulating was that we would want to go through the Paragon boards to just pick up these rare and legendary nodes, which we'll get to in a second. But they've confirmed here that each time you go to a new board, it will be more expensive to get the different skills and abilities and bonuses. So you're really going to want to max out each board as you pass through it, because the first ones are going to be much cheaper than the ones later on. And the final node are the legendary nodes, which are really powerful. And the one that was shown was a 25% chance to not consume a crackling energy, and the damage was increased by 2% based on your intelligence, which I'm assuming Endgame is going to add up a hell of a lot. Now, this was already a lot more depth than we knew about the Paragon board, but next up are the glyphs. Glyphs are placed into sockets to affect nearby nodes and are also fueled by nearby nodes, which will give further customization as you move through the board. These will also be upgraded in nightmare dungeons, and they offer an extra part of customization. So depending on where you place it on the board will completely affect what skills get buffed. So they said maybe you're playing an incinerate build and your friend might be playing an incinerate build, but based on the path that you take through the board and where you put your glyphs, your version of that build will have different strengths and weaknesses compared to your friends, which honestly to me sounds pretty cool. I'm sure there'll still be a meta build at some point, but I do think that that's a really good idea. In this interview, they also gave us a look at the loop of the Endgame gameplay, and although we knew some of this, they clarified exactly how it works and also gave us a look at some new dungeons and how nightmare dungeons work and the special things that will happen when you go in there. So to start this off, you'll unlock World Tier 3 by completing your first capstone dungeon. And according to Riker, this was not easy. He tried to go in a little underleveled at level 45 instead of 50, and he really struggled, and it took a lot of moving things around and figuring his build out before he could complete it. And what these capstone dungeons will also do is introduce you to how the devs ramp up the AI, the monster damage. There'll be more aggressive, there'll be champion creatures, and a lot of other things that will make as you progress from 50 up to 100 and beyond, because they've confirmed that some of the dungeons will even go up to level 150 even though your character's only 100, so it's going to be really difficult. And as you complete this capstone dungeon, that's really your first gateway into that difficulty increase. World Tier 3 is where you'll first start seeing sacreds, and World Tier 4, which is torment, is where you'll start seeing ancestral items and of course uniques. Now, I believe uniques can drop in Tier 3 too, but they're a lot rarer, and they've also said that these items will drop at your level. So if you're lucky and you get something really good at level 53, you'll be able to use that straight away. And what's really interesting here and caught me completely off guard is as they were just talking about this stuff, they said, oh, and maybe you'll just want to trade it instead. This is interesting to me because they've been really funny about how they want to do trading in the game. They said it will be in the game, but it'll be limited. But then they've gone and said, oh, when you get this awesome sacred thing at level 51, you'll be able to just go and give it to someone else or sell it to someone else, which is counter to what they've said in the past. And I'm intrigued to see how that's going to work at launch. Now, I'm all for trading, but it is a little odd that they just came out with that one in the middle of this stream. Last up on the drops in those tiers as well, they've said that some unique items will be returning from previous games, like the Grandfather, and they showed a couple more on the stream as well. And I'm sure that they'll continue to add other uniques from old games that people really enjoyed. Now, this gets even more interesting as we move into the helltides and how they feed into the nightmare dungeon. So the nightmare tier, which is the one at level 50, would unlock unlock all these activities, and helltides are sections of a zone that will turn into a hard version. And in there, you will fight the harder enemies, and you will also farm cinders, and you will use cinders to open caches for a specific piece. So say there's a helmet you want to farm, you'll go in there, you'll farm a load of cinders, and then you'll hand them in. But if you die, you lose half your cinders, and if the time in the zone runs out, you will also lose all of your cinders. You can't farm them up over a week and then go and open loads of caches. You actually have to farm them up in the session you're playing and then redeem them, and then they'll be gone once you exit or that helltide is over. There are also item drops, of course, that are really high level in these zones as well. It's not only the caches, and as mentioned, there'll be a lot of different bosses and events that show up in helltides that don't show up in normal regions, and there will be specific crafting materials as well. And this will drop things like sigils, and these will give you access to nightmare dungeons, and they finally give us an example of what this will look like. As you can see on this screenshot, as the tier of these sigils increases, the dungeon will have more affixes, and there are minor affixes and there are greater affixes. Now, they're not separated on here, so it's hard to tell what one is which, but as an example, I'm pretty sure the blood blister on screen is one of the greater affixes, and it's also similar to greater affixes we've heard from before, such as the lightning bolt that follows you around in the dungeon, which will one-shot you periodically if you don't keep an eye on it and get to a bubble that will protect you when it procs. There's going to be all of these minor and major affixes in the dungeons, and when you get a sigil, say it's too difficult or it's all lightning damage and you don't have any defenses against lightning damage, you can actually deconstruct the sigils, and when you have 4 deconstructed ones, you can create a whole new sigil. So you don't necessarily have to do the one that you get, and I'm sure that later on when we get to tier 100, there might be 5 greater affixes. So not only will there be exploding blood blisters, there'll also be a lightning bolt chasing you. There might be something else chasing you that will periodically shock you and stun you. So if you get stunned next to a blood blister, you'll get one shot, and as these things progress, it'll get more difficult the higher the tier. This is exactly the kind of thing that these games need endgame, and I'm intrigued to see what other affixes that they decide to add as the seasons progress. This is also where they said that some of these will go up to monster level 150, and that some of the nightmare dungeons will even have a death count. So if you die too many times, you will fail the dungeon and lose the sigil. Then we had some beta learnings. We've already been over the class changes, of course, but they've also changed some things with dungeons. They've tried to make it so that now when you're backtracking, which is something people didn't like, it's much more likely that monsters will start ambushing you on your way back. But they've also changed the layouts and where objectives are located in the dungeons so that you pick up objectives as you run through the dungeon rather than getting to the end, then realizing you missed it and then running all the way back, which I think is a good change. Also, there's other changes like the missions that want you to kill all the monsters. You know how you would miss 1 or 2 and they were right at the start? Well, now when you hit a certain percentage, I assume it's 80 or 90%, all of the monsters in the dungeon actually run to you to kind of try and mob you and kill you at the end, which I think adds a much better piece of gameplay than having a backtrack to find the last couple. And also the objectives where you have to pick up the anima from the enemies, well, actually you'll now start getting buffs as you collect more of that, so you'll become stronger, or you'll get ability cooldown reset and all different things to keep it interesting when you're going through those objectives. And the fact that they turn this around in such a short time is really promising, and I'm intrigued to see what other dungeon objectives they decide to show us in later seasons. Another thing as well is that there were some complaints that the dungeons didn't go down into another levels, and they actually said the dungeons do that. When you climb down a ladder or you go down the stairs, there are parts of the UI that will now show you you're in the lower chasm or something like that, but because it's so seamless, people didn't notice. And they said that they do have the tech to make multi-layered dungeons, which made me hopeful that in the future they would do that. So maybe you would go and do that first level, and the next level you go down to will be exceptionally harder, because in the current build, yes, you do go down some stairs and things, but the level of the enemies remains the same. I think what people want is to go down another level and it becomes significantly more difficult. Now, this all wrapped up with a Q&A and an announcement. The announcement being the new beta, the server server slam where they want everyone to play from May the 12th to 14th. There will also be new unlockables for this as well. There'll be a trophy for your horse if you manage to defeat a Shava at level 20. And they have actually lowered the cap for this beta, and they say that a Shava will be more difficult to defeat now, although you can always turn down the world difficulty to make it easier. A Shava will spawn every 3 hours, and I think they said that means there will be 9 opportunities to defeat a Shava to get this trophy, and you will also have the ability to unlock the other rewards from previous betas if you didn't manage to play them. Regarding the Q&A, mostly it was things that have been heavily covered before, but there are some things here that are slightly new. So only so many dungeons per season will be nightmare dungeons. This isn't something we knew before. We thought it was all 100 and something dungeons, but it isn't. They don't know what that number of dungeons is going to be, but it will be a fixed number per season. They have confirmed, for those concerned, that altars of Lilith will reset every season. However, the stats that you got from them do not. Once you unlock a stat on a character, it will unlock it for all characters as well. They've also confirmed that same thing happens for hardcore characters. So your normal and hardcore characters don't cross-pollinate. However, the hardcore ones will all benefit from those buffs too. Now, although they do reset, I know that's going to upset some people. They have said that you barely need to get any if you go and do the other things in the zone. So let's say you go and do all the missions or the side activities, discover the whole zone. You probably don't need a lot of altars of Lilith to get that renown. So even though the renown is going to reset, the actual stats from the altars don't, and you won't have to hunt them all down every season. Someone also asked, and this was kind of brutal, and I wish I hadn't left it to the end of the video to say this, but someone asked if they play solo in the Fields of Hatred, which is the PvP zone, are they going to run into groups? And they said they wanted to be very clear about this. There is technology in place to make sure that you are not playing people that are a much higher level or gear level than you are. However, it is not a place for honor, and solos will run into groups. There are some potions and things that may allow you to run away a little easier, but this will probably turn into a group activity or a very skilled solo player activity. This is just how they want it to be, and I'm honestly not surprised, because in a game like this that's mostly built around PvE, there's going to be so many broken things anyway. I think trying to really balance the PvP right now doesn't make sense. I know everyone wants arenas and things later on, and I'm sure that they'll add that if enough people ask for it, but the Fields of Hatred sounds like it's going to be pretty brutal for solo players. They also confirmed there is no mouse and keyboard on console and no couch co-op on PC, as well as no plans for WASD movement. One thing they actually did say is possible though is you can pick some things up while you're riding around on your mount in the current newest build of the game. And that's the last thing that they really sent home, is that this build that we play on May the 12th is the gold version of the game. This is the game. They want us to hammer the servers so that they are ready for launch. So there was a lot of information in it, guys. I really tried to compact it and put in the info that we didn't know, as most of this stream really covered things that we did already know. I can't wait to play the game again. I'm a little gutted that they're not giving us a different zone to play in, and there was no confirmation of that new class that everyone said was leaked earlier in the week. But be sure to let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below, and be sure to drop a like, because it does help us out and lets us know you're enjoying the content. Be sure to have a great day as always. Take care and peace, people.